In this module, we're going to cover the broad range category of charcuterie. In this module, we'll cover the following objectives: preparing force meats, assemble and cook pâtés, terrines, and sausages, prepare and use aspic jelly, employ the proper methods for brining, curing, and smoking meats and fish, identify cured pork products, and prepare and use sausage chauffois.
I'm looking forward to teaching everybody about charcuterie.
So what we want to get across for everybody is we want to teach them about what charcuterie is, how it came to be, and how to eat it. So those are the three topics that we want to touch on.
Let's do it.
What is charcuterie, Rock?
Okay, so we're going to talk about the different types of charcuterie. First one is the salumi. They're ground meats. They're flavored with the herbs and spices from the area that they come from. Then you've got your cooked charcuterie, things like mortadella, my favorite. And then we finish up with prosciutto, which is just pork, salt, air, and thyme. The best.
Yeah. There's a whole world of charcuterie out there that a lot of our customers don't even recognize as charcuterie, but they should.
Yeah, so you got prosciutto, salami, everybody knows those. You got bacon, pepperoni, pate.
People are always confused when I tell them bacon, right?
Yeah.
Right. Rillettes,
even
pate,
the fish stuff.
Exactly, yeah, the cured fish. Bacala.
Yeah, bacala.
Come on.
There are several different types of charcuterie: force meat, sausage, pâté, terrine, galantine, roulade, and salt-cured and brine products. A force meat is a preparation made from uncooked ground meats, poultry, fish, or shellfish. It's seasoned and then emulsified with fats. It's used as a primary ingredient to make pâtés, terrines, galantines, and sausages. Textures vary from smooth and velvety to well-textured and coarse. To ensure the proper emulsification of a force meat, the ratio of fat to other ingredients must be precise. Temperature must be maintained below 41 degrees Fahrenheit or 5 degrees Celsius. And the ingredients must be mixed properly and thoroughly. Some different types of equipment that you'll need for making a force meat: food processors or food choppers, drum sieve, and a standard meat grinder, plus various different size grinding dies. The ones that are shown in these slides are all commercial grade, but they do make residential grade as well. Let's take a few minutes and talk about force meat ingredients. The meats are the dominant meat that is what gives it its flavor in the force meat. It could be chicken, beef, pork, poultry of any kind. It could even be vegetarian or seafood. Fats used are adding moisture and richness to a dish. You want to use the fats that are a little more solid in nature as opposed to the ones that are squishy. Binders, such as a crustless white bread soaked in milk or eggs, sometimes even used together, gives it a nice binding. If you think about it, we do the same thing with meatloaf. And then seasonings, salt, curing salts even, which we'll talk about later, marinades, and various herbs and spices that go into it for flavor. And then finally, our garnishes. These are meats or fats or vegetables or other foods added to in limited quantities to provide contrasting flavors, textures, and colors. So, for instance, a salmon and scallop mousseline terrine wrapped in leek leaves, or a pâté en croûte with Brunoise garden vegetables, or pâté de campagne, which is wrapped in prosciutto, fish terrine with salmon, dill, and pink peppercorn garnish wrapped in spinach, or a chicken roulade with pistachios and dried cranberries. Cured meats are easy to make at home if you have the right stuff, and that means curing salts, also known as pink salt, Prague powder, or TCM, tinted curing mixture. Curing salts is a mixture of salt and sodium nitrite, also known as sel rose in French. It's used to inhibit bacterial growth and preserve the meats while keeping the color and flavor intact. The addition of 6.25% sodium nitrite is the key. Just don't use it as a table salt. It controls the spoilage of bacteria and growth of the bacteria, and it preserves the pink color of the meat once it's cooked, which is why it's often dyed pink. Also, this helps to identify it readily and prevents you from putting it on the table. There are typically two different kinds of pink curing salts or tinted curing mixtures that we use, and they're referred to often as prog powder. This is prog powder number 1, which is also known as Instacure or Modern Cure. Cures are used to prevent meats from spoiling when being cooked and or smoking at low temperatures, typically under 200 degrees Fahrenheit. This cure is 1 part sodium nitrite and 16 parts of salt, and then are combined and crystallized to assure even distribution. As the meat temperature rises during the processing, the sodium nitrite changes to nitric acid and starts to gas out at about 130 degrees Fahrenheit. After the smoking and cooking process is complete, only about 10 to 20% of the original nitrite remains. As the product is stored and later reheated for consumption, the decline of the nitrite continues. 4 ounces of prog powder is 1 pound. Prog powder number 1 is required to cure 100 pounds of meat. So again, the sodium nitrite converts into nitric oxide, and this requires cooking or slowly smoking things at temperatures of less than 200 degrees. This is the prog powder you want to use when you're applying heat. 4 ounces of prog powder of number 1 is required to cure 100 pounds of meat, or 1 level teaspoon is required for every 5 pounds of meat. Prog powder number 2 is used on dry cure products. It's a mixture of 1 part of sodium nitrite and 16 parts of salt, as the same as prog powder number 1. But in this case, since this particular product does not convert the same, it does not require cooking or smoking or refrigeration. This cure is sodium nitrite, and it acts as a time release, slowly breaking down the sodium nitrite into the nitric oxide. But before it does that, it starts as sodium nitrate, works its way chemically to a sodium nitrite over time, and then becomes nitric oxide as it starts to cure. This allows you to dry cure items and products that take a much longer time to cure. A cure with sodium nitrite would dissipate too quickly. You want to use this again similar to the way we do the others. The difference here is sodium nitrite, or sodium nitrate rather, in prog powder number 2 is used without heat slowly over time. Prog powder number 1 is the heat application. Prog powder number 2 is without heat. Just like in prog powder number 1, the ratio for this is 1 ounce of the cure for 25 pounds of meat, or 1 level teaspoon of the cure for 5 pounds of meat. And it's very important that you stick to these ratios because too much of this can create toxicity in the food. Pâté spice is a typical spice blend. This is a recipe that's used for a traditional pâté spice where we take 2 to 3 bay leaves. We apply a half a teaspoon of thyme leaves. Typically you want to use dried fresh thyme leaves. And what I mean by that is you want your thyme leaves to be fresh, but you can leave them out of the refrigeration on the countertop for several days and allow them to dry out some after they've been picked, and they crumble and grind very nicely. A half a teaspoon of mace, which is the outer coating of a nutmeg shell. If you can't find mace, you can substitute a little bit more of the nutmeg and add just a touch of cayenne pepper to it. 3/4 teaspoon of cinnamon, 1 teaspoon of nutmeg, 1 teaspoon of cloves, a half a teaspoon of white pepper, a half a teaspoon of rosemary, again, allow it to dry out, and a half teaspoon of basil, and a pinch of cayenne pepper again to give it a little bit of a bite. And then you want to grind all those things together and make sure they're all incorporated together as a process. When it comes to preparing force meats, preparations include time and temperature control for safety, or TCS foods. Temperature control must be strictly maintained. All food contact surfaces and cutting boards must be sanitized, and you want to make sure that your table is sanitized as well. To ensure proper emulsification, force meats must be kept below 41 degrees. Grinder and food processor parts are typically frozen, kept in the freezer. You can even keep your food processor parts stored in cornstarch, which will prevent any ice crystals from building on it if it has any water on it. All food must be cut into small pieces, small enough to fit in the grinder. You don't want to overstuff the grinder or the food processors.
Pâté de campagne. That's right, this is the video the charcuteries do not want you to see. Because when people find out that country pâté they've been charging $30 a pound for is really nothing more than cold meatloaf, well, you can imagine what will happen. Millions of Americans will continue not to buy that pâté. But above and beyond saving a few dollars, I think this is a really fun project, and I thought this really came out tasting great. So, as they say, let's go ahead and get this pâté started right by tossing several different meats into a mixing bowl, which will include a whole bunch of pork shoulder that I cut up into like 1-inch pieces. And then to that, I'm going to add some duck meat, which I've trimmed off a couple large legs. Since we're doing a country-style pâté, some type of game bird would be very traditional in this. Okay, so our pâté base is going to be pork and duck, but we also need to include a very healthy dose of fat. And today I'm going to be using some diced up bacon, but some pork belly would also work. And we'll go over all your fat options on the blog post. And then, of course, it would not be a real pâté unless we add a little bit of liver. And while pork liver would be more traditional, I'm going to use chicken livers, which I've chopped up kind of roughly to make them look even more disgusting. So before people turn off the video, let's go ahead and cover those with a diced onion, as well as some sliced shallots and minced garlic. We will also toss in some freshly chopped parsley, at which point it's time to season this up with what looks to be a dangerous amount of kosher salt. But don't worry, it's the perfect amount. And then besides regular salt, we're also going to add a little bit of pink salt. And no, not pink Himalayan salt, pink curing salt, which you may or may not have purchased for our ham video. So that's optional, but if you do have it, we'll toss a little bit in. And then we're definitely also going to need to toss in a spoon of pâté spice. And you might be thinking, hey, I don't have that. It's okay, nobody does. Which is why we make our own by combining the following 4 ingredients. Some ground ginger, a whole bunch of freshly grated nutmeg, some ground clove, and some type of ground pepper, usually white or black. But we're going to shock the world by using cayenne. And we'll give that a mix. And that's it, you are now the proud owner of some pâté spice. Which, by the way, is great in so many other things, which unfortunately we don't have time to review, because we need to finish this off with some freshly ground black pepper, as well as a nice big splash of brandy, or I guess cognac, if you want to waste the good stuff. But of course, that's up to you. You guys are the Billy Mays of your country-style pâtés. Which reminds me, never buy anything for the kitchen that you see in an infomercial. Usually that's a bad idea, especially if it slices and dices things. But anyway, once we have all those ingredients together, we'll go ahead and give that a thorough mixing, at which point we're going to wrap it up and pop it in the fridge to marinate for about 2 hours. Okay, some people like to go overnight, but I don't. I think a couple hours is perfect. So we'll go ahead and wrap that up and pop it in the fridge. And while we're waiting for that, we can go ahead and make the next component, the panade. And for that, we will start with some plain dry breadcrumbs, to which we will add a couple large eggs, which appear to be very excited they're in this. And then we'll finish up with some heavy cream, and that's it. We will give that a mix. And that's what we're going to add to our meat later to help bind it together, as well as help provide that beautiful tender texture we're going for. And when you first mix this, it's going to look kind of thin, but as it sits on the counter for a few minutes, it's going to thicken up quite a bit, as you'll see when we add it to our ground meat, which, by the way, is the next step. And as you might know, one of the keys to successful meat grinding is to use very, very cold meat. So what we're going to do is transfer this onto a sheet pan, and we'll pop that in the freezer for, I don't know, about 15 or 20 minutes, at which point it's probably going to look something like this. And we certainly don't want this frozen solid, but it should be very, very cold to the touch and starting to firm up a little bit. And I think using very cold meat is important no matter how you grind it, but especially if you're going to use the grinding attachment on your stand mixer, which isn't really exactly heavy duty, But having said that, if your meat is properly prepped, this does do a very decent job. I do try to make sure I keep that plate in front of the blade cleaned off, but other than that, there's not much to do except pass it through. And I'm sorry to disappoint you, but I'm not going to show a lot of this grinding footage, since nobody should have to look at this longer than necessary. But anyway, we're going to go ahead and coarsely grind our meat. And by the way, if you don't have one of these machines, there's other ways you can do it, which I will be happy to outline in the post. And then what we're going to do once our meat's ground is toss in our fruit and nuts. And I'm going to be going with some dried cherries and pistachio. And since that's our garnish, we want those pieces whole, which is why we didn't grind them. And by the way, these are optional. You don't have to put them. But we are doing a country-style pâté. And if you've ever been to the country, you know there's lots of fruits and nuts. And then once we've added whatever we're garnishing with, we will finish this off by mixing in our panade, which as predicted has gotten very thick. So we'll go ahead and transfer that in and mix it until combined. And I say mix, but it's really more of a fold. Because as with working with any kind of ground meat, we really don't want to overwork this if we can avoid it. So we'll kind of stir and mix and fold that together. And then what we'll do once that's been accomplished is transfer this into some kind of fat-lined mold. And for a mold, I'm using a bread pan, and for fat, I'm using bacon. I really do like to use caul fat, and that is more traditional, but I didn't have any, and the bacon really does work nicely. And then as you may have guessed, we're going to go ahead and fill that to the top with our mixture. And yes, I might have a little too much, but that's okay. And by the way, please make sure whatever you're using is long enough to overlap, because we are going to add a few pieces to the bottom. I mean, it's the top now, but it will be the bottom. And then once we have our meat transferred in and successfully encased with bacon, I'm going to add a little piece of parchment paper over the top. And then we'll wrap that nice and tightly with foil, preferably heavy duty, at which point we will transfer that into some kind of deep pan or Dutch oven. And in case you're wondering, that was just a little silicone pot holder that I put at the bottom for a little insulation, but it's probably not necessary. It just seemed like a cool thing to do. And then once that's placed in, we want to partially fill that up with hot water. Just hot tap water is fine. And we want to fill that up somewhere between halfway up the pan and, oops, I went too far. So I usually shoot for about 2/3 of the way up our mold. And then because the other secret to this is cooking it to a very specific doneness, I'm going to go ahead and insert one of these probe thermometers before we put the lid on. And that's going to ensure we cook this to the perfect internal temperature. So we will go ahead and place that in, and then pop on the lid, at which point we will very carefully transfer this into the center of a preheated 350-degree oven for about 2 hours or so, or more importantly until it reaches an internal temp of 155. And we really do want to go by temperature here because there are so many variables that will affect the cooking time. So for me this took about 1 hour and 40 minutes. And then what we'll do once it comes out and we remove it from that pan is let it cool down. And because I filled mine so much, it was actually coming up above the top of the pan. So for now I'm just going to press it down with this heavy cast iron baking dish. And I should mention if you didn't overfill yours, you could just skip to the next step, which is the official way we're going to press this while it cools. And the reason we're doing this is so things compact a little bit, and we end up with a little firmer and what most people would consider nicer texture. And by the way, in case you're wondering, the reason I like to transfer this into a dish lined with paper towels is because as we press, some of those juices and excess fat will leak out. But anyway, let's go ahead and remove that foil and proceed to the official pressing method. And for that, what we'll do is cut a nice thick piece of cardboard, just a little smaller than the opening, and we will wrap that in foil. And we're going to use that to press down our pâté as it sits overnight in the fridge, with the help of a little bit of weight. For example, a couple cans of garbanzos, or something heavier might even work better. But the point is, make sure this is weighted down as it chills overnight in the fridge, so that the next day it's nice and firm and compressed, and looks something like this. And then what we'll do to unmold this is simply dip it very briefly in some very hot water, just for a couple seconds, and that pâté should slide right out. And we could start to slice, but for best results, I like to pop it back in the fridge until that bacon's nice and cold again. Right, when we slice, it should be firm and white like lardo, and not flabby and translucent. So I did rechill mine, at which point we can slice in and see how we did. And as I was cutting this, I didn't even have to wait to taste it. I could tell by the way the knife was sliding through, the texture was perfect. And the appearance? Check it out. There is no way that could possibly look any better. Unless I guess we saw a few more pistachios. So I cut another slice. And there we go. That can't look any better. So visually I was very happy with how this came out, and it looked like the real deal. But I needed to go in for a taste to make sure. And I served that up very traditionally with some cornichons and mustard and toasted bread. And as happy as I was with the appearance, I was even happier with the taste. Alright, we joked about this just being a cold meatloaf, but because of all our rich meats and copious amounts of fat and salt, not to mention that little hint of gaminess from the liver, this goes so far above and beyond that in deliciousness, they really shouldn't have even been mentioned in the same video. I mean, taste, texture, appearance, I just enjoyed everything about this. So to summarize, there ain't no pate like a Chef John pate, because the Chef John pate don't stop until it's gone. So I really do hope you give this a try soon. Head over to foodwishes.com for all the ingredient amounts and more info as usual. And as always, enjoy.
Some common force meat preparations. Your basic force meat, it's smoother and more refined, and probably the most versatile of all. This can be used for stuffing into a galantine or a ballantine, or it can be used for putting into a terrine. Pretty much any application that you would use force meat for, this is a good one to be able to use. It doesn't require a lot of processing. It can be a little bit rustic, or it can be somewhat smooth. Country style is the simplest to prepare, and it's heavily seasoned. Typically, country style force meats are chunky and will have bits and pieces of the whole mussels or chunks of maybe fruit or pistachios or nuts of some kind into it. A mousseline is light, airy, and delicately flavored, and is typically done just like you would do a chocolate mousse, with the addition of cream that's been turned into a whipped cream and folded into, let's say, for instance, a seafood puree. This allows for the structure of the seafood puree to become light and airy and not dense and chewy. Less of a type of force meat, more of a style of force meat. Quenelles are small dumpling-shaped portions of a mousseline. These look fancier than they are. They're basically, you take 2 spoons and you scrape them back and forth until you end up with this almost football-like shape. Using force meats, we've got several different styles we can do. The first is a terrine. Terrine, in this particular case, this is not a baked terrine, but traditionally they're baked in an earthenware mold. Also, you have metal molds, stainless steel molds. You have enamel molds, several different kinds like that. And the actual mold itself is referred to as a terrine, and that's where we get the name terrine from. Pâtés, or in this case, pâté en croûte, is a fine savory meat filling wrapped and baked in a crust. You don't necessarily have to have the crust to be a pâté. The pâté en croûte means pâté in crust. And this is an example of one in the picture. And normally what you would do with that is, as it's cooking, you would pour in an aspic, which we'll cover later, and it would fill the voids in there and keep it nice and tightly packed. The next two are galantines and ballantines, and are often mistaken with each other. A galantine is a force meat wrapped in the skin of the animal and poached and served cold. Whereas a ballantine is force meat wrapped in the skin of a chicken thighs or something along those lines, and then seared and finished off in the oven and served hot. Aspic jelly is used in the finishing and presentation of terrines, pâtés, and galantines. It adds flavor and shine, prevents display food from drying out, and it's made from a strong stock with increased gelatin, often an added gelatin to it. Plain gelatin, gelatinous meats, or bones are added. You may follow guidelines for gelatin content as required. Sheet gelatin works very well in this aspect. Also, you can use regular gelatin, powdered gelatin. You just don't want to use Jell-O. There are several different types of terrines that we could talk about. Liver terrines, a type of liver terrine called foie gras, vegetable terrines, bronze or aspic terrines, mousse, rillettes, confits, and crepignettes. Liver terrines are typically made from calf, chicken, beef, goose, or duck liver. They're popular and easy to make. Pureed poultry, pork, or veal livers are mixed with eggs and a padana of cream and flour, and then baked in a fat back-lined terrine. Although most liver purees easily in the food processor, a smoother finished product is achieved by forcing them through a drum sieve after or in lieu of pureeing them in the processor. Foie gras is unique even among other poultry livers in that it consists almost entirely of fat. Foie gras terrines are made from the fatted goose or duck liver called foie gras, meaning fatty liver. Foie gras requires special attention when cooking. If it is cooked improperly or too long, it turns into a puddle of very expensive fat.
It's as expensive as it sounds. Foie gras, the fattened liver of a duck or goose. You can find it at fine French restaurants, like here at Bistro Pierre Lapin in New York City, and a single appetizer can cost as much as your main course at your average diner.
I have to forecast for when we're making the terrines. That's 8 pounds of foie gras, that's $250.
So why is foie gras so expensive? First of all, ducks and geese are expensive to raise. Compared to chickens, they take up to 2.5 times longer to mature.
So the capital investment for a foie gras farm for the output is at least 2.5 times greater than that for a chicken farm.
And then there's force feeding, the process that fattens up the liver.
The duck is raised as a normal duck, and then for the last 2 weeks about of its life, 2 to 3 weeks depending on the farm, is force-fed corn and grain through a metal tube a couple of times a day.
It requires a ton of feed, as much as 4 pounds each day, which grows the liver up to 10 times its normal size. Plus, it requires a lot of time.
During that period of time, you have an enormous input of labor and cost of labor to grow and produce the finished product.
But it's hard to deny that foie gras is also costly, well, because it's so controversial. Animal activists say that foie gras is one of the most inhumane meats out there. And while farmers and some chefs disagree,
No one is abusing animals at a foie gras farm.
the moral debate has put pressure on supply, especially in the US. In fact, there are only 3 foie gras farms across the entire country. And it doesn't look like there'll be more anytime soon.
Nobody in their right mind would open a foie gras farm. Somebody tried to open a farm in Indiana about a decade ago and quickly decided that they couldn't handle the political aspect of it.
In early 2019, the Supreme Court upheld a foie gras ban in California, which went into effect in 2012. And even in the European Union, which produces 90% of the world's foie gras, around a dozen countries prohibit force feeding. Taken all together, that's why a pound of foie gras can cost as much as $90. And that's well before it makes it to the plate. Foie gras requires skill to prepare.
The thing is with foie gras is that you need to be taught how to handle it.
And skilled chefs like Harold tend to run pricey restaurants. Yet another reason why foie gras is so expensive. But still, people are willing to pay the price.
People love it, like they love it. That cannot be duplicated in any other way. A texture that is, very special.
So while foie gras may be controversial, it's unlikely to be kicked off the menu anytime soon.
Vegetable terrines are often made from softer vegetables such as squash, zucchini, eggplant, tomatoes, etc., but can also be made from items such as butternut squash, potatoes, onions, and the like. They may or may not contain dairy items such as cheese. They can also be held together with a non-protein aspect, making them vegetarian and vegan friendly. Vegetable terrines have a relatively low fat content and stunning eye appeal. Beautiful vegetable terrines are made by lining a terrine with a blanched leafy vegetables such as spinach, then alternating layers of 1 or 3 or 6 or 10 separately prepared vegetable fillings to create contrasting colors and flavors. A different style of vegetable terrine is made by suspending brightly colored vegetables in a mousseline forcemeat to create a mosaic pattern when sliced. Brons are aspic terrines made by simmering gelatinous cuts of meat, most notably pig's feet and head, including the tongue, in a rich stock with wine and flavorings. Enrich the stock with gelatin and flavor from the meat. This will create an unclarified aspic jelly. The meat is then pulled from the bone, diced, and packed into the terrine mold. Then the aspic is added to it and allowed to set. Head cheese is a common example, along with scrapple and souse. Mousse, much like its sweet cousin mousse, is bound together using cream. A savory version of mousse, which is not a mousseline forcemeat, is made from fully cooked meats, poultry, game, fish, shellfish, or vegetables that are pureed and combined with a bechamel or other appropriate sauce, bound with gelatin and lightened with whipped cream. A mousse can be molded in a decorated aspic jelly coated mold, such as one described in the process that follows, or is peeled off after the mousse is unmolded. A small mousse can be served as an individual portion. A larger molded mousse can be displayed on a buffet. Rillettes are prepared by seasoning and slow cooking pork or fatty poultry, such as duck or goose, in generous amounts of their own fat until the meat falls off the bone. The warm meat is mashed and combined with a portion of the cooking fat. The mixture is then packed into a crock or a terrine, and the rendered fat is strained over the top to seal it. Rillettes are eaten cold as a spread, accompanied by a little bread or toast. Confit is prepared in a similar manner as rillettes, except that before cooking, the meat or poultry is often lightly salt cured to draw some of the moisture out. The confit is then cooked until very tender but not falling apart. Confits are generally served hot. Like rillettes, confit can be preserved by sealing them with a layer of strained rendered fat. Properly prepared and sealed rillettes and confits will keep for several weeks under refrigeration. The classic example of a confit is duck confit, which is shown in the picture to the side. A thin layer of fat is used to line the terrine mold. The fat helps keep the forcemeat moist during cooking. Sliced fat back and caul fat are the most commonly used for this application. Caul fat is a web-like fatty membrane that surrounds the stomach and intestines of cattle, and sheep, and pigs. Caul fat is used to wrap terrines, sausages, and pâtés, as well as other forcemeat products such as crepignettes. The membrane holds the meat together, and during the cooking, the melting fat bastes the meat, adding moisture and flavor. Pork caul fat is generally preferred for these purposes. Using fatback or caul fat is essentially a form of barding that does not require any tying, twine, or toothpicks.
Today, we're making rich, decadent French country pâté. Trust me, you don't have to be a fancy French chef to make pâté for your own picnic. Historically, the tricky part about making pâté is that it involves a lot of steps, but it's also really easy to overcook. That won't happen here because we're cooking ours sous vide with Joule. You can walk away while it cooks and come back knowing your pâté will be amazing. Here's what goes into it. The ingredients are super inexpensive and easy to come by. You've got your base meats, your salts, and your binder. If you stick to the recipe on the meat, the salts, and the binder, you can get creative with your garnish, your spice mix, and whatever you want to wrap around your pâté. So we're gonna start with spices. The one we're doing today is nice and bright, perfect for summer, but you can use any spice you like. Once you have your nice ground spices, You're gonna get your salts and your cures ready. And when I say salts, I mean salt for seasoning and sodium nitrite, the pink salt. That's gonna make sure the pate stays nice and pink and lasts in your fridge a long time. Then we've got our meats. We've got pork shoulder, which is real classic, real traditional. You probably won't see a lot of pates without pork shoulder. We've got pork liver. That's gonna give it a nice mineral flavor. And we've got bacon. Bacon's gonna add a little bit of smoke, but mostly it's there for flavor and fat. We're gonna cube our meats. So I'm gonna cut nice little chunks. We're gonna toss those meats with the spices and the salt, then we're gonna put them in the freezer. We're gonna do that so it gets nice and firm, that way it grinds better. Once we've got that in the freezer, we're gonna go back to the rest of the pate. We've got a panade. All that means for us is a binder. And you've probably used a panade before when you've made meatloaf or meatballs. And what that does is it makes the pate nice and tender. So the more panade you add, the more tender your pate will be. We're going to take some eggs, milk, and bread, blend it up together. But the first thing you're gonna do is take the crust off of your bread. You can do any bread. You can even do crackers, breadcrumbs. All right, milk, 2 eggs. Whoop. I'll give it a little mix. The next thing we're gonna do is prep our mold. So we've got a classic tureen mold like this. This is a nice cast iron one. You can get these all over. We're gonna first line it with plastic. We line the mold with plastic. That way when the tureen's cooked, it just slides right out. You see how it sticks like crazy? So what we're gonna do, get a little ice water, get it nice and wet. Same little wet rag here. Start to work the plastic into the mold. You don't have to worry about these wrinkles. They'll barely show up later. Then we're gonna line it with bacon. So nice little sheets. Ask your deli guy to slice that bacon thin. Just make sure you get it into those corners. Lining it with bacon's totally optional, just makes it gorgeous. So remember our meat's in the freezer. From here, we're gonna grind it. So first thing apart, grinder, auger goes in. Whoop. Little blade, little die. Down. Woo! All right, we're in business. Woo! All right, we've got our ground and seasoned meat here. We're gonna add our panade, dried cherries, thyme. This is the garnish. You can add whatever you want. We're gonna add some wine for flavor. So we're gonna fill it up to like here, and then we fold all the bacon over it. This is the last step. Then the plastic wrap, then it goes in jewel. So we've got everything in our tureen mold and the pate's ready to cook. Traditionally, you would cook it in what's called a bain. Big pot of water, the mold goes in, you crank the oven up, and your objective is to not burn or overcook the pate and get it just to the right temperature, but it's really tricky in an oven. Today, what we're gonna do, instead of cooking it traditionally, we're gonna cook it with jewel. And what jewel is gonna allow us to do is get that beautiful, creamy pate texture we want without stressing. I'm gonna put a couple chopsticks down. That's gonna help the pate stay above the bottom, that way water can get underneath. I'm gonna put jewel in, hot water. Whatever's hottest out of your tap. I'm gonna use manual mode to set jewel to 167 degrees Fahrenheit. After the pate is cooked, I'm gonna take it out, chill it in the fridge overnight. If you want a little extra upgrade, we're gonna press it. Pressing the tureen or the pate will make sure that you have a very dense texture. Who wants some pate? Who wants some pate? Guys, if you like making pate, you're definitely going to want to make some other awesome picnic stuff like chicken liver mousse, pickled mustard seeds, wine gums, macaroons, all the French goodies. Go find the recipes at chefsteps.com and order a jewel while you're there. crazy amount of birds, huh? Because it's summertime and it's French picnic. It's summertime and we've got birds. I love the bird sounds.
For preparing a galantine, butterfly the breasts and tenderloins that are used. You can use chicken breast, you can use turkey breast, pork tenderloin, or any number of meats, and cover the skin with a thin layer of meat. Arrange the force meat in garnishes in the cylindrical shape across the center of the skin. Using plastic wrap to tightly roll the galantine and form a tight cylinder. Wrap the galantine with heavy-duty aluminum foil, and then you can submerge, poach, or sous vide in water until it reaches the desired temperature for doneness. Sausages are force meat stuffed into casings. Fresh sausages. For fresh sausages, fresh ingredients that have not been smoked or cured are used. Fresh sausages include breakfast sausage links and Italian sausages. They are made with fresh ingredients that have not been cured or smoked. This can also be bulk sausage not in the casing as well. Smoked and cooked sausages are made with raw meat products treated with chemicals, usually the preservative sodium nitrite. Examples are kielbasa, bologna, and hot dogs. Dried or hard sausages are made with cured meats and then air-dried under controlled conditions. Dried sausages may or may not be smoked or cooked. A dried or hard sausage includes salami, pepperoni, and sopressata. Smoked and cooked sausages and dried or hard sausages are rarely prepared in typical food service operations, although chefs are increasingly interested in preparing these artisanal foods. Rather, they are produced by specialty shops and facilities where sanitation is ensured. For proper fermentation and preserving of dry cured products, controlled temperatures under sanitary conditions are essential. A HACCP plan and a health code variance may be required in order to prepare dried cured foods on site. Sausage meats are force meats with particular characteristics and flavorings. Both coarse Italian and lamb sausages, for example, are simple country-style force meats without liver and the different seasonings stuffed into casings and formed into links. Hot dogs, bratwursts, and other fine-textured sausages are also variations of basic force meats stuffed into casings and formed into links. Although sausage mixtures can be cooked without casings, most sausages are stuffed into casings before cooking. Two types of sausage casings are commonly used in food service operations. Natural casings are portions of hog, sheep, or cattle intestines sold by the bundle, also called a hank. The diameters of castings are measured in millimeters, and they come in several sizes depending on the animal or portion of the intestine used. Sheep casings are considered the finest quality small casings. Both hog and sheep casings are used to make hot dogs and many types of pork product sausages. Beef casings are quite large and are used to make sausages such as ring bologna and Polish sausage. Most natural casings are purchased in salt packs. In order to rid them of salt and impurities, the casings must be carefully rinsed in warm water and allowed to soak in cool water for at least 1 hour or overnight before use. Collagen casings are manufactured from collagen extracted from cattle hides. These are generally inferior to natural casings in taste and texture, but they do have advantages. Collagen casings do not require any washing or soaking before use. They have a long shelf life and they are uniform in size. Because of their texture, collagen casings are often used for smoked sausages and snack sticks.
Welcome to another edition of Brewed for Food, Goose Island's education series. My name is Jesse Valenciana, and welcome to Meet Jesse. Sausage making can be a very intimidating thing, but I'm going to show you with the right equipment, you can make your own sausage at home. Why let the butcher down the street get all the fun playing with meat? First things first, I have a very fancy grinder. Spent probably too much on it, but you probably have a KitchenAid at home that you got for your wedding gift and probably have never used. With the right attachment, the meat grinding attachment, you can make your own sausage. So first things first, we're gonna take apart our grinder, and it's important when making your own meat, grinding your own meat, to have very cold tools. The tools always have to be cold. Before we break down our meat that we're gonna stuff in our grinder, let's put this stuff in the freezer, shall we? So today, I'm gonna show you how to make a Thuringer. It's a very nice, easy baseline sausage recipe. So if you're gonna make beer cheese, or if you've got some giardiniera that you're gonna put on top of it, the flavor of this meat is not gonna take away from anything else. So what you wanna start off with is a good chunk of pork. I recommend pork butt because pork butt is the best butt. It's nice, it's cheaper than pork shoulder, it's got a good amount of fat, and it doesn't have too much connective tissue, which could get inside your grinder and muck it up and slow it down. So the secret is to break down your pork into about 1-inch cubes, and you always have to have a good sharp knife. This is a chef's knife, a butcher's knife, not a chef's knife. So you want to get the meat, keep a lot of the fat, but destroy and get rid of all the connective tissues, because that's what gucks up your grinder. A good sausage always has a good amount of fat. So you've got some good fat like this right here that you can use for the sausage, and this is that disgusting connective tissue that you want out of it. See, it's got these weird capillaries and whatnot. I don't think it's capillaries. I think I'm just using that word because I read a medical journal.
Huh?
All right, so now we've cut up our meat into nice little chunks. Next step is to get a bowl, put your meat in there. For 8 pounds of pork, I probably got rid of close to 2 pounds. So you've got 6 pounds of meat to play with. I'm using 1 tablespoon of marjoram, another tablespoon of coriander, tablespoon of fennel, salt. I always add more salt than everything else. It brings out the flavors even more, so don't be shy with it. We've got some thyme here, and it's about 1 tablespoon of thyme, give or take. Thyme's a pain in the ass to get off of, like the little stalks it comes in. It takes a lot of time. Get your hands all nice and meaty, get in there. So we're gonna wrap this up, stick in the freezer for about half hour. Like I said, by that time, our equipment will be nice and cold, the meat will be nice and cold, and we can start grinding. All of our meat is cold again, and we've already ground it coarsely. Now we're going through a medium grind. So our meat's all ground and ready to be encased. Now, like I said before, it's important to keep all of your equipment really cold. Butchers have an advantage because they normally make their sausage in a colder room, like a walk-in cooler. So the secret to making sausage at home is really like getting in there. Get in there, dude, get in there. And freezing your equipment. Now that we're ready to make our sausage, we need different equipment. So here's our sausage attachment. The smaller ones are for breakfast sausage. The larger ones are for, in our case, just regular old grilled sausage. We've got another wheel here that's just gonna push out the sausage into are casings. So my natural casings have been sitting in water with salt, and they've been sitting in the freezer. So adding salt in there keeps them from freezing and sticking together. So I've added a brand new clean pan. The meat's on the other pan. It's going to be fed in through the equipment, so we could actually start making sausage. So what you want to so what you want to do is feed a little bit of sausage through, make sure it comes out. Then we're going to pinch it. We're going to pinch the casing, tie a knot. Keep on feeding. Can you just feed the sausage through? So I'm going to end up tying a knot on the casing. You want to make sure there's sausage all the way through, or else you won't have a nice taut link to start off your whole sausage chain. Thanks, Mike. He grinds pepper and he feeds meat like a champion. There we go. We just made some sausage. It's a big German smile. Think about the bread that you're going to use for your sausage. So I've got some brat buns at home, so I'm going to make a little bit longer link. The way I link it is I find the spot where I'm going to pinch it and I start squeezing the meat. Squeeze that meat away from the middle, so you can twist your link, or else it's going to be too tight and you're going to snap your casing. There you have it. Sausage. This is a Thuringer, just like my grandma when she came from Germany. She brought this recipe with her. I'm just kidding. I found this in a cookbook, but it's a delicious recipe. All right, these sausages are ready to be thrown on the grill, or if you want to, what I do is I like to par cook them over a stove with some beer and some water and finish them off on the grill. But they are complete, and however you want to enjoy them, they're ready to go. Recipe below. Remember to like, comment, and subscribe. Thanks for watching Meet Jesse. Cheers. It's a Goose Island thing.
Salt curing is the process of surrounding a food with salt or a mixture of salt, sugar, nitrite-based curing salts, herbs, and spices. Salt curing dehydrates the food by drawing out moisture, which inhibits bacterial growth and adds flavor. It's often more used with pork products and fish. Salt curing as a preservation method is not a quick procedure. The time involved adds money and production cost. For example, country-style hams are salt cured. Proper curing requires approximately 1.5 days per pound of ham, which means 3 weeks for the average ham. Some salt-cured hams, such as the Smithfield and the prosciutto, are not actually cooked. The curing process preserves the meat and makes it safe to consume raw. Gravlax is a well-known salmon dish prepared by salt-curing salmon fillets with a mixture of salt, sugar, pepper, and dill.
Hi again folks, welcome back to €5 Food. Today I'll be making gravlax, or cured salmon. This delicious Scandinavian delicacy is wonderfully easy to make and perfect for parties at Christmas, New Year, or Midsummer. To make this dish you're going to need the following ingredients: 1 large salmon fillet with skin, deboned, descaled and trimmed, equal parts salt and caster sugar. For a large piece like the one I'm using, you'll need about 2 deciliters, which is around 1 cup of each. 2 tablespoons of juniper berries, and these are optional, and 1 large handful of fresh dill. And here are the ingredients on screen once again for you now. Start off by crushing the juniper berries, if using, in a pestle and mortar. Mix the salt, sugar and crushed juniper berries together in a bowl. Place the salmon out onto a large board and rub the sugar and salt mix well into the flesh. Finally chop the dill and pack the dill onto the top of the salt rub. Cut the salmon in half and fold it back onto itself so the flesh sides are facing inwards. Place the salmon onto plastic wrap and cover well. Place into a bag and store in the refrigerator on a tray for 3 days, turning over each day. After 3 days, remove the salmon, rinse away the rub and dill, pat dry, finely slice and then serve. Thanks ever so much for watching. I hope you enjoy making your very own gravlax. I'll be back soon with something new, so do check back again soon for more recipes from €5 Food.
A brine is actually a very salty marinade. Most brines have approximately 20% salinity, which is the equivalent to 1 pound or 480 grams of salt per gallon or 4 liters of water. Like dry salt cures, brines can also contain sugar, nitrites, herbs, and spices. Brining is sometimes called pickling. Today, most cured meats are prepared in large production facilities where the brine is injected into the meat for rapid and uniform distribution. Commercially brined corned beef is cured by this process, as are most common hams. After brining, hams are further processed by smoking. Smoking preserves flavor and protects food for longer storage. There are 2 types of smoking, cold and hot. Cold smoking dries and flavors food at low temperatures between 40 and 85 degrees Fahrenheit or 4 and 29.4 degrees Celsius. Cold smoking at the lowest temperature of 40 degrees Fahrenheit, 4 degrees Celsius, promotes food safety because it is below the temperature danger zone. Meat, poultry, game, fish, shellfish, cheese, nuts, and even vegetables can be cold smoked successfully. Cold smoking foods are actually still raw. Some, such as smoked salmon or lox, are eaten without further cooking. Most, such as bacon and ham, must be cooked before eaten. Hot smoking cooks food at higher temperatures than cold smoking, usually between 160 and 185 degrees Fahrenheit, or 71 and 85 degrees Celsius, in an enclosed oven for a long period of time. Hot smoking foods are fully cooked by the hot smoking process and do not require additional cooking before eating. As with cold smoking, a great variety of foods can be prepared by hot smoking, including meats, poultry, game, fish, and shellfish. Although most hot smoked foods are fully cooked and removed from the smoker, some such as bacon are used in other recipes that call for further cooking. Select fresh, unblemished food for the highest quality to smoke. If frozen products are being smoked, properly thaw them under refrigeration before smoking. All food to be smoked should be salt cured or brined first under refrigeration. Salt curing and brining adds flavor, allows the nitrites and nitrates, which give them the ham, bacon, and other smoked foods and meats their distinctive pink color, to penetrate the flesh, and most often and most important, extract moisture from the food, allowing the smoke to penetrate more easily. Before smoking, wash the food to remove the cure or brine. Allow the food to dry until the surface develops a sticky skin called a pellicle, a thin sticky membrane or skin that forms on the surface of cured fish, meat, or poultry exposed to air. The pellicle protects the food from drying out during the smoking process. Thanks to the pellicle, compounds in the smoke stick to the skin, flavoring and coloring it. In the world of barbecue, the smoke ring is one of the most sought-after properties of smoked meats. It is believed to show that you've done a good job and properly low and smoked the brisket. A smoke ring is a pink discoloration of meat just under the surface, called bark. It can be just a thin line of pink or rather a large thick layer. A good smoke ring is about 1/4 of an inch in thickness. The smoke ring is produced by a chemical reaction between the pigment in the meat and the gassings produced from the wood or charcoal. When burned, these organic fuels produce nitrogen dioxide gas. This gas infuses into the surface of the meat as it cooks, surrounded by the smoke. It reacts with water in the meat and produces nitric oxide. Myoglobin is the iron-containing purple pigment in the meat. When meat is exposed to air, it reacts to the oxygen, developing a bright red color that you might think is blood, but isn't. The red or pink color of raw meat is due to this oxygenated myoglobin. An aspic jelly is a mixture of stock, and typically an additional level of gelatin is added to that. Once the gelatin is made, cool the clarified aspic jelly by slowly stirring it over an ice bath. Brush or spoon the aspic jelly over slices of chilled pâté arranged on a cooling rack. Repeat until the coating reaches the desired thickness. Sauce chaufroide, which is French for hot cold, is a decorative coating used in the presentation of cold cooked foods. It derives its name from its method of preparation. The sauce is prepared hot but served cold. Knowing how to prepare and use sauce chaufroide is an essential skill for a garde manger chef and considered part of the craft of charcuterie. Traditionally used on cold meats, poultry, fish, and other items that were eaten cold, sauce chaufroide is now more typically used to coat a whole poached salmon or a whole roasted poultry item, which is then further decorated and used as a centerpiece. Like aspic jelly, chaufroide that has been eaten should be fairly firm when cold, gelled at room temperature, but tender enough to melt quickly in the mouth. Chaufroide used only for decorative purposes should have a heavier gelatin content and be quite firm, which makes it a little easier to work with. A classic chaufroide is a mixture of 1 part cream and 2 parts stock, either a light veal stock, chicken, or fish stock, strengthened with gelatin. Depending on the stock used, it ranged in color from cream to beige. A more modern sauce chaufroide, also known as a mayonnaise chaufroide or mayonnaise coulis, is made from mayonnaise. It's easier to make than the classic sauce and provides a whiter product, which is more desirable when used for centerpieces. In summary, let's discuss some of the takeaways for this module. Charcuterie platters can add a great deal of value to a party by combining meats, cheeses, and other items such as pickles, olives, mustards, jams, and breads. Pâtés, terrines, sausages, and cured meats were developed as a method of utilizing excess products and preserving them for later use. Over the last 200 years, the garde manger chef has become indispensable in the operation of many large fine dining establishments. Hot and cold smoking are done for flavor. However, hot smoking is also used as a preservation method and is done over a long period of time. The term hot smoking is a bit of a misnomer, as it only occurs during between 160 degrees and 185 degrees Fahrenheit and rarely ever over 200 degrees Fahrenheit. And while often considered old school, aspic and chaud froid are still a valuable skill for all garde manger.